Hello, welcome to the Nemeth Report podcast. I'm Dr. Tammy Nemeth, energy historian, analyst, and consultant, and I'll be your host. Today, I'm absolutely honored to be joined by the amazing Robert Bryce, author, journalist, filmmaker. We're going to be discussing the practical realities of our energy system in the face of the push towards net zero. And Robert, can you please briefly introduce yourself to those listening who may not know who you are?
Yes, of course. Well, first, happy to be with you, Tammy. Followed you for a long time. We've known each other for a while. We saw each other in London a few weeks ago, and that was great to see you in person. I'm Robert Bryce. I'm based in Austin, Texas, proud native of Tulsa, Oklahoma. First things first, I'm a proud father of three great kids, Mary, Michael, and Jacob. They're all adults, healthy, happy, doing well, and married to the woman of my dreams, Lauren Bryce. She will be married 39, married 39 years on June 7th. So those are the important things. Those are the things that matter the most in my life. I also happen to be an author, a reporter. I consider myself a reporter. If people ask what I am, I'm a reporter. I write about the energy and power sectors, have been doing so for close to 40 years now. And I'm the author of 6 books. Here's one. There's Smaller, Faster, Lighter, Denser, Cheaper, published in 2014. Well, actually, I have Matt Ridley's latest book, which is really good. Big fan of Matt Ridley, who was in London. And then this is my latest one, A Question of Power, Electricity, and the Wealth of Nations. I've also been the co-producer of 2 documentaries that are out, one called Juice, How Electricity Explains the World. Yeah, there's a 5-part docuseries that came out 15 months ago called Juice, Power, Politics, and the Grid, a 5-part docuseries. JuiceTheMovie.com, JuiceTheSeries.com is where you can find those. And I write on Substack, robertbryce.substack.com. How's that?
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I will put all of those links in the description. So if people want to check out your work, it'll be there. I highly recommend both Juice series, especially the one last year, which is in the individual parts on YouTube. It's fantastic. You know, segueing into all the different work that you've done, for like 30 years, you've been working on these kinds of things. What first drew you to focus on this tension between, say, how we get our electricity, what that means for people, and what the real world challenges are?
Excuse me. Well, yes, electricity is something I've been on really focused on for the last 10 years. I started working on my latest book and also the documentary, our first documentary, the feature-length film, in 2015, 2016. And I just had this, and once I started looking at what was happening with electricity, and I was puzzling over, there was one moment, in fact, I remember reading a piece about Nigeria and the problems of blackouts in Nigeria. And I remembered that many years earlier, decades earlier, 60 Minutes had done a piece, and Morley Safer had gone to Lagos and talked about the Nigerian grid. And he was kind of made this sneering kind of thing about the fact that their car batteries, or big lead acid batteries, were being used in Nigeria for backup. And he was kind of, not sneering, but pointing that out, how remarkable this was, right? And here it was, something like 30 years later, and I realized, well, Nigeria hadn't made any progress. Well, why was that? And so that really was the kind of the inkling of in my head about, well, why is it that this country can't have a reliable electric grid? And the short answer is corruption. But it led me to a broader, thinking more broadly. Well, there's a book here. There's a book to be written about why some countries are electricity rich and others are electricity poor. And that was the genesis of the book. And then I was writing this book. I had a contract with my publisher, Public Affairs, and I thought, well, I'll just do a documentary at the same time. How hard can it be? Well, it's pretty hard, actually. I don't recommend it. But now that it's done, I'm glad that it's done. We did the same. Worked on both projects at the same time. But electricity is the world's most important and fastest growing form of energy, and it's particularly important for women and girls. And so over the last decade, and particularly the last 5 years or so, that's really been my focus, talking about electric grids, power, and why, and the need for more electricity all over the world, not just for data centers and, Google and Apple and the rest of them, but in fact, for poor countries, rich countries all over the world. This is the challenge of our age.
Yeah, and that brings me to the presentation that you gave to the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference, where I saw you in London. And I think the YouTube title for it is "The People Climate Activists Leave Behind." And what you presented there was so powerful. I saw that you brought in some of the issues that you talked about in your first documentary, and then that
Right.
you talked about in the second documentary. Can you just give a brief rundown of what was your thesis in that presentation, um, and and how is that related to the work that you're doing?
Sure. Well, I started the presentation and I was very honored to be, invited to speak at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. And they said, you have 12 minutes, and we don't mean 12 and a half. We don't mean 11 and a half. Or we don't mean 15, we mean 12. And it was a really good exercise for me because I do a lot of public speaking and I usually speak for 40 minutes or so, 45 and something like that. But to get to the heart of the matter and to point out in particular why electricity matters to women and girls. And so I started the presentation by talking about the trip that we made to India about 8 years ago, and meeting this woman, Rahena Jamadar, in this rural agricultural village in called Majlishpur, southeast of Kolkata. And Rahena was this gracious woman, very graceful, obviously intelligent. And my friend Joyashree Roy was translating, and she explained, Rahena did, that she'd had electricity in her home for about 14 years. Well, she'd lived most of her life in the dark. She had her first child when she was 16. And so we started talking about what electricity had meant now in the last 14 years. And she allowed that one of her children, her daughter, was going to the university in Kolkata. And in addition, she said, it made, they had lights at night, and that was really key. And that, they were using electricity in the kitchen, but the lighting was key. And when we got through just a short, little further discussion, and I asked her, well, Rahena, if you'd had electricity when you were a child, you would have been able to study at night. Would you have gone to the university as well? And she said, yes, I would have gone. So, even it's funny how you think about things, events, people you meet, and, you get insulted, or you think of a funny line after you're there and you think about it a day or two later. Well, that happened to me. I was in Jaipur, and I realized, I had a day to myself to think a little bit. And I realized what this woman had told me, Rahena had told me, was darkness kills human potential and electricity nourishes it. And she had lived most of her life in the dark. And, when the lights go, when the sun went down, you go to bed because you can't afford candles, and it's too expensive, and to try and, run, keep electric light at night. And that really impacted me. It really brought home the human story that I needed to really understand, and also help drive the narrative, to be, blunt about it, to drive the narrative for the film, but put a human face on this issue of energy and electricity poverty, and to make me understand that electricity frees women. And why is it so important for women and girls? It frees them from the pump, the stove, and the wash tub, frees them from having to carry water by hand, from having to wash clothes by hand, and from using wood and dung and wheat straw and other things to cook dinner. And so, that experience was incredibly rich for me, and I owe a great debt of gratitude to my friend Joyashree Roy for making it happen. And that became one of the center points of our film. And my colleague Tyson Culver directed and did a great job. And that really was what the focus of my point was at ARC. That this is key for the developing world. And yet we have this in the developed world, and at the World Bank and other lenders, they kind of scoff at this idea of, electricity. And it's almost as though they prefer energy poverty. And I pointed out that this is it's a terrible kind of position, especially for entities like the World Bank.
For sure. And what I find interesting is when I look at what the World Bank is talking about with respect to climate change in the developing world, they're talking about we need to use renewables there, that they
Sure.
can leapfrog coal and oil and natural
I
gas.
love that. And they think
Leapfrog.
it's like the cell phone. They think, oh, we're going to leapfrog, and we don't need high power systems because we can just, that we can use the cell phone. And no, wrong, damn it. These use little microvolts of power. They need, to run an industrial system in modern society, you need megavolts. You need, you can't megawatts. This idea, where they're going to leapfrog. It's such bullshit. I'm sorry. We're on a podcast. I could say bullshit. It's bullshit.
So you're saying that there's no way that India could run and the economy and bring up the women and children out of energy poverty with wind and solar.
I am saying that most definitively. And anyone who says that they can is just lying. It's simply not true. And, it's funny. There's this kind of paternalistic kind of, egotistical kind of a pat on the head attitude. What is that? Paternalistic attitude toward the developing countries. Like they just don't know what's good for them. If only they would do what we tell them. They don't. They don't need to be burning coal. Well, that assumes that these countries and the people who run them are just idiots. If this was the case, then why, if India could run their entire economy on wind and solar, and it's so much better, and batteries are so much better, why are they building coal-fired power plants? Why is China today building 200 gigawatts, 204 gigawatts, 204,000 megawatts of new coal-fired capacity? Are those Chinese that stupid? I mean, no, they're doing what works for their own economies. And so this attitude of, oh, well, they should just use renewables. Well, it's like, as I've said many times, let them eat solar panels. It's that same kind of Marie Antoinette, oh, let those, those idiots, those poor poverty stricken, well, they just need a few solar panels and that'll be fine. That's enough for them.
Yeah, that's that condescending attitude
That's
that,
the word. Yeah.
It's like we know best, we know better than you. The other element to that is, to me, the way I think about the way the climate movement is, the green movement, it's fundamentally misogynist because all of the things that they say that the Western society needs to do, what developing nations need to do, punish women.
Yeah.
It really does because, for example, where they want to take away the internal combustion engine and they're mandating this in Canada, the UK, the EU.
Right.
It then puts women, they say you should be able to take the bus or take public transport or ride share or any of these other things or walk or whatever. But once it gets dark, that
It's
really
good for
puts
you. It's good for you. It's good for your health to ride
good
a
for your
bike
health.
in the rain and the
In
snow
the
when it's freezing outside. It's good for you. It's just better. Livable city. Yeah, livable city.
Yeah.
That's what we need. Yeah, that's the other part.
Right. And if you have children and you're dragging the kids around and then it's at nighttime, let's say you finish work late and now you're supposed to just go on public transit and people are complaining that public transit is incredibly dangerous now.
Yeah.
So, if you take women out of the cars and if they have an EV, then they get range anxiety. Am I going to make it home?
Yeah.
At the end of the day kind of thing. So, it's like
I
with
think
all of
that's
these
I think
different
that's a
things.
key insight though, Tammy, what you're saying is about the, what if we as a society, and I'm using the royal we, papal we here, believe that we need to help lift women and girls out of poverty, what do they need? They need cheap, abundant, reliable electricity. They need cheap, abundant, reliable propane. They need low
Yeah.
cost hydrocarbons. And that was one of the points that I made in London, was that this could all be solved if we, with more propane. These women that are, this was the other part. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead, but that this is the scandal. I mean, in addition to the point about having women wash clothes by hand, which is
Yeah.
Hans Rosling estimates there are 5 billion people walking around in clothes that have been washed by hand. Well, that means there are 2.5 billion women and girls doing that washing.
Yeah.
But the other scandal here, and this is the one about women and girls that is so key, is that indoor air pollution from using low quality cooking fuels, biomass, wood, wheat straw, etc., dung, is killing 3 million people a year, according to the World Health Organization. More people are dying every year from indoor air pollution, and they're almost all women and girls because they're the ones doing the cooking. More people are dying every year from this low quality cooking fuel, from energy poverty, than die from AIDS, HIV, cholera, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. And yet we don't hear anything about it. I mean, it's just,
No, that's shocking.
it is shocking. And the numbers are the numbers. And that's what I pride myself on. Pride myself on my numbers. These aren't my numbers. They're the numbers. And yet there still is this paternalistic attitude. And I think you're right, at root, misogynistic about, oh, well, those people in Africa, those people in South Asia, those people in rural, South America, wherever, they don't deserve propane. They don't deserve electricity. What they have is enough. We're just going to give them a little bit so they can be happier in their poverty.
Yeah. And so the way I see it is that, so we're up here and we're supposed to come down like this, and they're supposed to come up a little,
Yeah.
but we're
Right.
supposed to come down so that we're equal.
Yeah.
But I think some
We
people
should
end up
use
being more
less.
equal than others. Yeah, we
Yeah.
should use less and all of that. So with respect to the energy transition in Western countries, and the United States was really on that trajectory under the past 4 years with the Biden administration and the Inflation Reduction Act and all of that sort of expenditure that was really putting um, putting America on this sort of the same trajectory as the European Union with respect to wind and solar and batteries and so on.
Right.
There was resistance, and I know that you created this amazing database. Is it called the Renewable Rejections? Is that
Well,
what it's
I
called?
now have 3 databases, and actually starting a 4th one. But yes, so I started with the Renewable Rejection Database, which looks solely at the United States, and started that in 2015, looking at rural communities across the country and cataloging them and annotating all of the rejections or restrictions. That number is now 793 since 2015. And then in the last few weeks, I launched the Global Renewable Rejection Database because I realized, we need the world needs, people need the media need to know what's happening around the world. And there have already now, since the first of the year, been a dozen rejections in the UK alone. And then I also launched the Battery Rejection Database because batteries now are facing all kinds of resistance around the world. In particular, now after this the Moss Landing fire in California in February, January and February. So, land use policy and energy policy go hand in hand. And
Yeah.
I've been a longtime member of the media, and I see these media reports that vastly understate the amount of resistance in rural America against these projects. And in fact, just last night, I saw a piece that was published in one of these, the left-wing climate activist groups. And it was the reporter, mentioned a few of the rejections, and I emailed the reporter. He lives here in Austin. And I said, by the way, I've been keeping this renewable rejection database, and you vastly understate the scale of the rejections. Haven't heard back.
Of course. Of course.
Haven't heard
Um,
back.
haven't heard back. So with the well, let's dive into this a little bit. So the global rejections, are you tracking the rejections in developing world? Like, if I recall, I can't remember if it was your book or Michael Schellenberger, where I think it was in India where they had Greenpeace had come in and set up these solar panels, and people got to charge their phones for like all of 10 minutes or something, and
Yeah,
then it was done. The energy was done. And so when they first brought it in, the minister responsible came, made a big speech, and it was, hey, this is so great. And then when it turned out it wasn't working, they wanted to rip it down. And when he came to the village, they threw things at him and stuff like that. And so I'm wondering what's happening in the developing world in communities when wind and solar, particularly solar, I guess, in India is being they want to install it. What did the people say? What's been the reaction there?
sure. Well, I have one in specific. I know there's here's one that occurred in India where this was in 2023. Local farmers protested against Tata Power's 100 megawatt solar plant, leading the Maharashtra Forest Department temporarily halting the project due to land rights issues. Also in 2023 in Colombia, Enel, an Italian company for which I have I have no respect at all because of what they did in Osage County, Oklahoma, which I hope we can talk about. They're losing in federal court in a long running battle with the Osage tribe. But in 2023, they suspended work on a project in Colombia, a 200 megawatt, I think it was 200 megawatt wind project, because the indigenous people in that part of Colombia kept protesting. They protested for years, blocked roads. So, what's interesting, Tammy, is, you distinguish between the developing countries and in the developed world. And that's an important distinction. But what I know from now more than a decade of reporting on this, in fact, it's 15 years now, local people everywhere, everybody everywhere cares about their neighborhood. And so what we see with all of this alt energy sprawl, and that's what it is, energy sprawl that comes with the developments of wind and solar, is that local people are looking around and saying, hey, we don't want our houses surrounded by, tens of acres or hundreds of acres of solar panels, that we're creating a desert. We don't want to live there. Same with these wind projects, these massive wind projects, and the backlash against wind is what really got me going on this. But so India, Colombia, I mentioned the UK already, a dozen rejections there just since January 1st. This is rampant all over the world. And it's not just, of course, it's wind, it's solar, it's batteries, it's high voltage transmission projects.
Yeah.
All of this alt energy crap, and it is crap, all of it requires massive amounts of land. And when that's where the conflicts are occurring all around the world. And, people need cheap, abundant, reliable energy, and they will do whatever they have to do to get it. And in many cases, solar and batteries can be a game changer for people. And there's no doubt about that. And I'm not going to say there's no use for these kinds of technologies, but we have to be very sober about these issues. And, the media coverage on this has just been abysmal. The New York Times will not cover this issue. I dealt with a Washington Post reporter. I forgot his name because he was such a jerk about the whole thing. He called me, asked for me to help him find some context. And then he wrote this completely bullshit article, just bullshit. Oh, all these people, local people are just protesting wind and solar projects because they're Republicans. It's a lie. It's a lie. And they do it with a straight face.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know whether they do it straight face, but they do it all the time.
I loved your comment about energy sprawl. That is such a great way to express it, because you can talk about what's the footprint, what's the land usage, and so on. But energy sprawl, that is really good, because when you compare, say, a coal-fired power plant or a natural gas combined cycle plant, if you look at how much space they take up, it's really like this nice compact area that produces so much energy.
Yeah.
Which, of course, we get the power density, law of power density, which I love how you always describe. But to describe it that way, it's no wonder that people all over the world, regardless, as you say, whether it's just humanity is like, what are you doing? Why are we doing it? It doesn't even provide the reliable energy it's promising. And then there's all of these other residual effects that really have been understudied, with respect to changes in temperature, changes in soil temperature, wind currents, all of these different things, which have precipitation, all of that stuff. And so maybe that's a good way to segue into what happened with the Osage tribe and their resistance to this project that it's been ongoing for a long time. And every time they get a ruling, it's like the company doesn't do anything.
Yeah. Well, let me just come back to the Osage in a minute, because that's near and dear to my heart. But you mentioned the issue of power density, and that's the key, right? And I wrote in my fourth book, Power Hungry, our energy and power systems are determined by what I call the four imperatives: power density, energy density, cost, and scale. And they are all interrelated. But power density is the one that is the most important. And what is power density? It's the measure of energy flow can be harnessed from a given area, volume, or mass. So we want high power density systems because they require fewer materials. They require less land, fewer inputs. And that's why I'm so adamantly pro-nuclear, pro-natural gas, because as you pointed out, the power density of nuclear and natural gas is thousands of watts per square meter in general. And, some of these shale pads, shale gas wells that are being drilled now, they're multi-well pads. They have power densities equal to or exceeding that of nuclear power plants. That's the kind of energy flow that are coming out of these very small footprints compared to wind and solar. And therein is the rub. And I'll conclude the power density lecture with this, but it's the iron law of power density. The lower the power density, the higher the resource intensity of whatever kind: copper, metal, or copper, concrete, steel, land, fertilizer, etc. But you have to counter that low power density with other inputs. And the only way that wind and solar can add significantly to our generation mix is by increasing their footprints. And that's just fundamental. And so that's the problem now, is that the rub is continuing to be, as these mandates and heavy, massive subsidies for wind and solar keep going, they are, the push is to, pave rural America, rural Britain with these projects. And the local people are saying, stuff it. We're not going to put up with this. We don't want this here. Go away. And one of the pieces I wrote just recently talked about, it was in Ireland, I think in County Kilkenny. The local people there had held protests against a proposed wind project for a year. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, it just, well, the latest rejection was in France, but let me just see if I can find this one. It was in Ireland, and that, it was in County Kilkenny, and they had been protesting for a year in front of the office of the company that was trying to build this wind project. So Now, if I've been going on here, and I'm all torqued up about this because this is what I do. But now let's talk about the Osage tribe in Osage County, Oklahoma. Their battle with NL, the Italian company, the Rome-based company that is all about ESG. You look them up and they're just, it's ESG this and, this responsible corporation that and blah, 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 blah. They have been locked in the longest running legal battle over wind energy in American history. And the Osage tribe right now is kicking their butt in federal court. And I got to tell you, I am loving it. So what happened? Well, in 2011, Enel starts prospecting in Osage County saying they want to build this wind project. 2014, they're ready to start building or have already begun construction. The Bureau of Indian Affairs sent them a letter saying, cease and desist. You must get a permit from the Osage tribe before you start this project, because the Osage tribal members, including the late Joe Connor, were very aware of what was happening and said that if they're going to start building these wind projects or these wind turbines, they're going to be digging in the subsurface. We own the subsurface. So yeah. Very brief, bit of Oklahoma history. Under the Osage Allotment Act of 1906, Chief James Bigheart negotiated a deal where the tribe had, retained the right to all the subsurface in Osage County, including the oil and gas and the rocks. Everything else that's under the surface is owned by the tribe in common. That, of course, led to the later. Well, there was massive oil and gas discoveries made in Osage County, led to the reign of terror in the 1920s, where it's documented in Martin Scorsese's film and of the same name, the Killers of the Flower Moon, based on David Grann's marvelous book of the same title. Osage tribal members were being murdered for their head rights, for their oil wealth, and this was rampant. And dozens, perhaps even hundreds, of Osage tribal members were killed for their ownership, for their mineral rights. Okay, so that's the backstory. Well, then here comes Enel, these Italians, these foreigners into Osage County. They want to build this wind project. They ignored the tribe, and they essentially tried to steal the mineral wealth of the tribe by ignoring the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Went ahead and built the wind project and started operation in 2015. That battle over the subsurface and the fact that the Enel mined the rocks under the tribe in the tribe's mineral estate without their permission. Twice now, a federal court judge in Tulsa has ruled on behalf of the tribe, and in December of last year ordered the removal of those wind turbines by December 1st of this year. Now that ruling has been appealed and stayed while Enel appeals the case to the 10th Circuit, I believe, in Denver. But those wind turbines are coming down. And when they come down, I'm going to be in Fairfax, Oklahoma with my brothers and sisters and my cousin Nora hooping and hollering. Why? Because my great uncle, Ernie Rapp, was a member of the Osage tribe. He was born and raised in Fairfax, Oklahoma in 1909. He had a front row seat to the reign of terror in the 1920s. My cousin Nora owns a Osage headright. I'm a member of the Cherokee tribe. This is one of the biggest victories for Native American sovereignty in modern history. And it's a massive, massive black eye for the wind business. And yet, not a single word in the New York Times, not a single word in the Washington Post, National Public Radio, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal. They won't cover it because it doesn't fit this narrative about clean energy. It's, I get worked up about it because this is such an important story. And, maybe I should be happy because no one else is covering it, but it's something that I care about a lot.
Why was the tribe unable to stop the construction of it? Like when the court said don't build it, why was the tribe unable to I don't know, go out there and stop it?
Well, I don't know. Mao said political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. I think maybe tribal members could have gone out there with shotguns, but it's a split estate. The land was owned by in fact, this is one of the interesting parts of the story as well. The surface is owned by the family and of a man named M. John Kane, who just happens to be the sitting Chief Justice of the Oklahoma Supreme Court. So these politics about what did Faulkner say about the past isn't past, the history isn't past, it's not even past, or what how did he say that? But this century of injustice in Osage County and what is happening, to the tribe, and the fact that the tribe is now fighting back, it's just an incredible story, and one that, it really is deeply relevant to me because of my family and, my Uncle Ernie, who I love dearly. And my cousin Nora, who's just all, so happy about these rulings. And it matters. It matters a lot. And the tribe wasn't able to stop it because they didn't have the legal authority. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is effectively
Right.
acting as their agent. And,
Yeah.
I guess the BIA, I don't know if they have guys that carry guns or not, but I guess they could have called the U.S. Marshals or somebody. But, it's truly incredible. But it's one of these examples of how big moneyed interests, and it's, I see this solar and wind push. It's about big banks, big law firms, big business, and the big NGOs trying to roll over rural Americans and rural residents in Britain and elsewhere. It's all
Yeah.
about, so it doesn't have anything to do with climate change, Tammy. It's all about money.
Yeah, it looks that way. Especially like in the UK, I know that there's been these rejections this year, but the Labour government that's in charge right now nationally has changed some laws that will enable them to override what
Right.
those rejections are. Especially in that sort of midland area where
Yeah.
they seem to figure we can just paper over the farmland with solar and wind or whatever. I know that just outside of Oxford, there's a massive solar installation being constructed right now called the Cowley Solar Plant, and it's taking up this amazing farmland
Yeah.
and you know really destroying the countryside. So I I I think that people are upset and they don't want it, but now because when we've had these activists like Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil that created, so much disruption with their antics,
Yeah.
and then they passed a law in order to stop that kind of thing from going forward. People are actually sort of limited now on how they can push back on what they're doing. So it'll be interesting to see, at least for the UK, what happens in the next 6 months, where they really want to bulldoze through and do
And
what they
that's
want.
the right word.
Yeah,
And
is
it's
bulldozing.
important that you mentioned the farmland issue, because this is another one that comes up over and over in these rejections all over the world, is farmers and ranchers saying, this is prime land. We need to, food first. And this has been some of the, the pushback all across the US and in Britain, preservation of prime farmland. It's interesting. It
Yeah,
was a year ago, February, I'm pretty sure, with the province of Alberta. You're a Canadian. I'd be
yeah.
proud of this, that the Albertan government, led by,
Danielle
she's
Smith.
Danielle Smith. Thank you. One of the leading lights of the conservatives in Canada. They passed a measure that prohibits the use of, or the energy sprawl of alt energy on prime farmland. They
Yeah,
also have the strictest setback requirement of any setback that I've seen anywhere in the world, and I'm pretty knowledgeable about this. I think it's 30 kilometers from
yeah,
the Rocky Mountain parks. So that is an incredibly important move, and again, that it's happening in Canada, and that matters as well, because in Ontario you have nearly 100 communities, municipalities that have declared themselves unwilling hosts for wind projects. So it's, again, this is happening all over the world, and it's because people care. It's just, you made a great point about the British government. So how is it that this is interesting, right? You've got the liberals, the supposed ones who care about the working class, siding with big moneyed interests and big banks to roll over rural communities. And the same thing is happening here in the US, where in the past few
yeah,
years, you've had 4 heavily Democratic states, liberal states, Michigan, Illinois, New York, and California, all passing measures that will allow their bureaucrats in their respective state capitals to force local communities to take wind projects, wind solar projects, and battery projects they don't want. I mean, isn't it incredible? Isn't it, that, and why is that? Because the Democrats don't care about rural America. It's just
yeah,
that simple. They don't get any
yeah,
votes there.
yeah.
The county by county maps show that, they don't have any votes out there. So what do? Well, screw those people. A bunch of hicks. They voted for Trump anyway.
Exactly. And in the UK, it's the same thing. The rural communities did not vote for Labour at all.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, well, okay, if you didn't vote for us, we're going to make sure that our friends get their palms greased or whatever. And it's interesting because the Octopus Energy has been one of the real benefactors, and Dale Vince. Dale Vince was a funder of of the Labor government in their
Sure.
campaign, and so he's
Oh,
looking
I'm
to really
shocked.
benefit,
I'm
so
shocked.
right?
Tammy, do
Shocked,
tell.
just
You're
shocked.
saying money is influencing politics? Oh, that is just incredible. I would never thought of that.
Would never happen, right? Just never
But I will
happen.
say this about, what's happening now that you're living in the UK is you have, it was interesting. We were in London, at the same, we saw each other there, and Lorna and I stayed for 10 days. And I did a lot of, asking people and taxi drivers, tell me about what's going on in the energy thing here. And, and all of the Londoners that I talked to said their energy bills had doubled in the last
Yeah,
4 years. And then
yeah,
they were creating some real hardship. But the taxi driver who took us to the British Museum said it's the Uniparty, and this is what I was getting to. Yes, it's Labor, but the Tories. I
yeah,
mean, explain the Tories. Liz Truss comes in; she's in office for a cup of coffee and says we're going to repeal the ban on fracking. She's then defenestrated. Rishi Sunak comes in and says, "Oh no, we're not going to frack. No, 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 no. He's a Tory. What are you doing? If you're going to be serious about energy policy." Britain has enormous shale gas resources
yeah,
in the Gainsborough Trough in Lincolnshire, 16 trillion cubic feet of immediately recoverable resource. And that
yeah,
the actual resource or reserve is actually much bigger than that. You can drill for it. You can frack for it. You can start producing gas domestically onshore and get it flowing within a couple of years. And yet what happens after this article comes out in the Telegraph delineating this? The Labor government immediately says, "Oh no, we're going to ban fracking forever. We're clean energy, blah blah blah." I mean,
yeah.
you know,
And close down North Sea. So it's really funny if you look at the map of the North Sea, and on the one side is where Norway is developing different fields, and
yeah.
then you see the delineation for where the UK has control over it, and
Oh,
you
I'd love
see
to
on the
see that.
Norwegian side all these wells and everything, and on the UK side there's almost nothing. But I mean,
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that map. That'd be great.
it was hilarious. I'll send it to you, but
Thank you.
it just indicates where you have Norway, which is supposed to be the poster child of ESG with their
Sure.
investment fund or whatever. But on the other hand, they're also the number one supplier to Europe of natural gas, of oil or whatever. And and um, who's criticizing them for developing the North Sea? And yet the UK, which also has assets in the North Sea, is putting up every possible roadblock. No more new licenses, a windfall tax that is almost like 110%. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. So why would a company possibly want to keep producing out of the North Sea when they've extended the windfall tax past 2030? I'm like, though it was meant for the war in Ukraine, are they expecting the war to extend to 2030 that they want to keep this windfall tax? And with
It's true. It truly is incredible. And you mentioned Norway. Now, the statistics department in the UK published this very interesting graphic, and I published it on my Substack a few weeks ago, robertbryce.substack.com. Almost about half of the imported gas now into the UK comes from Norway.
yeah,
The second biggest supplier is the US.
yep,
18. So when you do that, you do the math. Now Britain is importing roughly half of the gas that it consumes, and half of the biggest chunk after Norway, the supplier is the U.S. Almost 20% of all the gas now consumed in Britain is coming from the United States in the form of LNG. I
yeah.
mean, it's just I still can't quite believe this is true. I mean, and how is it that the Brits and the Germans are marching lockstep, goose stepping, I guess, well, I guess goose stepping in lockstep, driving themselves into the ditch from an energy standpoint? And I made this point with many people in London when I was there. How is it that that one of the homes of the Industrial Revolution, the United Kingdom, has now closed its last blast furnace? You cannot
Yeah,
make virgin steel in Britain anymore
yeah.
because of these insane energy policies. I mean, it's just that was the Port Talbot Steelworks in Wales, and I mean, it's what a tragedy it is for Britain now that they've become so I don't know what so enamored, so caught up in this net zero silliness that they're just committing economic suicide.
Yeah, I'll just jump back a little bit to the point about the uniparty. That's
Sure.
for the reason why you have the rise of reform,
Yeah.
because traditional conservative voters were saying, oh, what I heard was, why should I vote for them? Because they're not listening. We don't want any of this stuff, and they keep doubling down on it. We
Yeah.
don't want net zero. And yet they keep telling us we have to have net zero. Why don't we get a conversation? Why don't we have a referendum on this? They wanted Brexit. They never actually executed Brexit properly. Mark Carney was in charge of Project Fear, which was basically just slow dragging any of the stuff that they were supposed to do in order to make Brexit a success. So people were angry. They wanted Brexit, didn't get it. They didn't want net zero, but they got it. And and they felt like, well, who can I vote for? I can't vote for the conservatives anymore. And honestly, I blame David Cameron because when he came into the party, he's like, we have to move more to the left. We have to embrace green because everybody's green now. And so we need to take ownership of that for the conservatives. Otherwise, we're dead as a party. I mean, and because of that, that's why we have this sort of domino effect of a uniparty.
Yeah.
And the conservatives aren't there anymore, and it's reform, and reform has its own problems. So for people who truly want change and want something different, I don't know, conservative party has to do a complete overhaul, and I don't think they have it in them.
Unfortunately, I don't think they do either. And, I'm saying that from guy from Texas, what do I know about British politics? But, in my conversations with people in London and who had been in government, that was the consensus, that there's no appetite right now, despite all the pain, despite all these
Yeah,
massive increases in energy prices, despite the fact that UK now has some of the highest electricity prices in the world, of any developed country, rather, that there's very little political appetite for shedding these insane policies. And so, but it's remarkable as I look around the world, and I'm fortunate. I'm going to Australia in a few weeks, and I've been in the UK, and where is this destruction happening? California, Australia, Britain, and Germany. They're the four poster children for stupid policy,
yeah,
on the energy front. And I mentioned the closure of the Port Talbot steelworks. The other big closure of the industrial plant that was closed in January was the synthetic ethanol plant in Scotland.
yeah,
And that this was the last plant of its kind in the UK. And why are they moving? Because or quitting because of, again, energy costs. And so you've
yeah.
had multiple hundreds of people lose their jobs. And this is the deindustrialization of Britain. I'll just give you one more quick anecdote, and this is only an anecdote, but I mentioned I'm not shy. I think we've established that, right? I'm a reporter. I travel with a reporter's notebook. And so I went into shops and with restaurants and taxis, and I would ask people, well, tell me about your energy bill. And as I said, everyone said at least that it had doubled. The last night before we left, we went to a pub around the block from the hotel, and there was a woman behind bar, and she was in her mid-20s, and I asked her the same question. And she says, well, I said, what's up with your energy costs? Have it changed a lot? She said, oh yeah, it's really, really expensive. She said, I live with my parents. I said, really? And she said, yeah, we don't shower at home anymore. I said, what do you mean you don't shower at home? She said, we go to the gym. We shower at the gym because it's so expensive to heat water at home. We shower at the gym. Now, one anecdote, but still indicative of, someone who's a very, clearly working class, just getting along.
Yeah.
And yet, what do? The bills are now so high that they don't shower at home. I mean, the Brits, God love them. Sober up, sober up. Look at what is really happening in your world and change course, by God. But you can't fight stupid.
Yeah, that's true. And, with respect to the bills, what's interesting is Ed Miliband, who is the minister responsible for net zero and
Sure.
energy, whatever. He keeps every day, he makes a tweet that the reason the prices are high is because of the war in Ukraine and that natural gas prices are high. And then when you look at the statistics, it spiked for like 6 months and it's been coming down. And it's
Yeah.
down almost to the point where it was back in like 2018 or something like that. So he's just, there's disinformation laws in the UK, and I wonder why he can still get away with making such overt disinformation posts like that. But I mean, he keeps saying it and repeating it, hoping people will believe it.
Yeah.
Because who bothers to look at those statistics? Who looks
Yeah.
at that graph? Um,
It's
yeah,
it's so unfortunate, but I think, would you zoom out for a little bit here? It's not just Britain. It's not just Germany. Europe as a whole now is
yeah,
facing this massive shift. Who knows if the Russians are going to give up in Ukraine? There's the U.S. and the West has very little leverage. Let's face it. Oh, well, Vladimir, you should stop. And he said, well, why would I stop now? You all are on the back. You're suing for peace. I don't really care. I can keep this up for a long time. But then if they're, but the reality is now you've got the price of natural gas going into Europe via LNG, which is priced at the TTF trading hub in Holland. It's 3 times the cost of gas here in the United States. So Europe is it's not on an equal footing anymore when it comes to the industrial base. And Germany, you look at what's happening at Volkswagen, look at the deindustrialization all across Europe. It's just of a piece. And it's all about this insane policy, this war on hydrocarbons that is being fomented by the NGOs and the climate activists, and the politicians are paying too much attention to them. And let's not forget, a lot of these anti-fracking policies were in part funded by the Russians, and that is very clearly this is verifiably true. This is not some made up stuff. This is the fact that Putin and Gazprom and his allies helped fund some of the NGOs that pushed for these fracking bans across Europe. And I think there's still 8 countries, including the UK, that have bans on hydraulic fracturing.
Yep, that's absolutely right. And that's a good place to end, because I know you have to get going. I could talk for hours on this.
I could as well. It's, I'm incredibly lucky to do what I do. I'm, so fortunate in my life and my career, healthy. I'm old and gray and turning 65 in a few months, but this is my purpose and my passion. And I'm, incredibly lucky to do it and have talks like this because, I have too many opinions to keep them all to myself.
It's good to share, right?
Sharing is caring. It's more like a therapy session. It's not a podcast. It's online.
Online therapy. I love that. That's great. Well, thank you so much, Robert, for taking the time. And I look forward to seeing what you present in Australia. Is that going to be, are you going to record that and put it up on your Substack or YouTube or something?
Oh, I'm starting to work on my charts for that. I've got slides I'm going to make on, cost comparisons. And, one of the things that's also important, I think, is in addition to these dramatic increases in price, right, for consumers, is the fact that like the UK, like California, Australia is a minor player in overall CO2 emissions globally, right? They 25 million people, 30 million. And yet they're like the Germans, they're deluded into thinking, oh, if only we adopt net zero, we're going to change the trajectory of the global climate. Well, you have a mighty big opinion of yourself and you're not looking at the numbers. So
yeah, exactly. Then the UK says the same thing. Canada says the same thing. And I think all between Australia, UK, and Canada, it would be like 4%.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah, if that. It's truly incredible. But this religious fervor, and I think that is the right word for this, right, from our description of this, is, it's damn the numbers, damn the facts. We don't really care about this. This is a type of climate jihadism and jihadism that is like any cost doesn't matter, but costs do matter. And this is the part that really inflames me and really motivates me, is that it's all negative for the poor and the middle class. It all hurts the poor and the middle class. And I'm just enough of a liberal in that regard to think this is a bad policy.
Yep. And it hurts women too.
That is an excellent point, as we discussed.
Well, thanks again. Safe journey. And I will put links in the description to your robertbryce.substack.com and all your amazing videos that are up on YouTube.
Awesome. Thank you, dear.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.